Egypt says it's bombed the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant in Libya, hours after the group released a video that appears to show the beheading of Egyptian Christians. But is ISIL expanding its brand, and how will that shape the fight against the group? This is Inside Story. Hello there and welcome to the programme. I'm Nick Clark. If the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant thrives on chaos and instability, then Libya must seem like fertile ground. Awash with weapons since the overthrow of long-serving ruler Muammar Gaddafi and overrun with rival militias as competing governments vie for control. At least 3 groups in Libya are said to have declared their allegiance to ISIL. The US Defense Intelligence Agency says ISIL also has affiliates in Algeria and in Egypt. And it's Egypt that's now been drawn further into the fight following the apparent killing of 21 Coptic Christians who travelled to Libya for work. A trademark ISIL video appears to show the men being beheaded on a beach. As Gerald Tan reports, Egypt's response has been swift.
Egypt retaliates. The operation in Libya visible from miles away. The military says it was going after targets affiliated with ISIL, but these strikes in Derna damaged several buildings in a residential area. Civilians were killed, including children. The air campaign took place just hours after Egypt's president warned it would respond to the killing of 21 Egyptians in Libya.
Egypt does not only defend itself, but the whole region. Egypt will react in the right time.
Egyptian fighter jets took off before dawn. The internationally recognized Libyan government based in Tobruk says the operation was carried out in coordination with its air force. But the rival National Congress based in Tripoli is denouncing the attacks.
We strongly condemn the Egyptian offensive on Derna city. We deem it an offensive against the Libyan sovereignty. We are sending our condolences to the family of the victims, and we call on Libyans to unite and end this critical situation.
Egypt's military has been running a campaign in the Sinai Peninsula since August 2012. As security unravels in Libya, it's forced to tackle the advance of ISIL on both sides of its border. Other nations are also concerned. ISIL made a direct threat to Italy in its latest video. The country, separated from Libya by a narrow strip of the Mediterranean, has now evacuated its embassy there and is calling for UN intervention. Gerald Tan, Al Jazeera.
Well, let us now get the thoughts of our guests. Joining me here in the studio is Martin Reardon, the Senior Vice President of the Soufan Group. And joining us from London is Jason Pack, President of Libya Analysis.com. And from Tobruk in Libya is Mohammed Eljar, non-resident fellow at the Atlantic Council's Hariri Centre for the Middle East. Gentlemen, welcome to you all. It's good to see you here to discuss this important issue. Jason Pack, if I may start with you, sir, first of all. These executions, gruesome and brutal, and the trademark ISIL video, not in Syria, not in Iraq, but in Libya. How do you read these developments?
Well, as your intro said, Nick, Libya has all the components that ISIS breeds on. You have a multi-pronged civil war. You have an anti-Islamist recognized authority in Tobruk fighting against a Islamist-aligned authority in Tripoli, but that's not the whole picture, because since Libya Dawn conquered Tripoli and was aligned between Misratan militias and various Islamist groups in the summer, they've also made what I think is a strategic error of aligning themselves with various jihadi groups in Darna, in Benghazi, and Sirte. But those groups don't actually have the same interests at heart as the core elements of Libya Dawn. And that's why you saw the January 27th attack on the Corinthia, because the jihadi groups don't have the same political goals as the quote-unquote moderate Islamist, Misratan, Muslim Brotherhood groups. And I'd like to tell the viewers the way in which this is like things in Syria. In Syria, obviously, the Assad regime, oppressive and repressive, is anti-Islamist and anti-Sunni in nature. And the rebels aligned themselves in 2012 with the Muslim Brotherhood. But they may have made a tactical error of also aligning themselves with various jihadi groups, such as Jabhat al-Nusra, and then later ISIS.
Okay, so let me just ask you one question. We'll get into all the machinations of all this as the show goes on, but let me just ask you one thing. Were you surprised by what happened?
Not at all. I mean, we've been known that these hostages were kidnapped for, over a month now, and Libya is a perfect petri dish for them to try out their operations, and they'd love to goad the West into action.
Let's go to Tobruk now. Let's bring Mohammed El-Jar. I can see, Mohammed, there that you were shaking your head in a disagreement.
The comparison there that was made between Assad being anti-Islamist and between the Tobruk government as well. The Tobruk government was an elected government, and it is internationally recognized government. Yes, we have another rival government in place, but it's important to understand that the reluctance of the international community to take decisive action in Libya has helped the Islamic State find the perfect environment for it to breed. And by betting on the wrong horse here, trying to get in some of the moderate, quotation, Islamists to get into the political process after losing the democratic elections, has now backfired. Now we see the Islamic State claiming control over cities, towns. They have access to at least one functional airport and two seaports in Libya, that's in Darna and in Sirte. Now, this is extremely worrying, not just for Libya, but for the region and the international community as a whole.
It certainly shows that the developing power of ISIL. Let me just bring in Martin Reardon here in the studio, and I'll come back to you, Mohammed, in a little while. Martin, I just wanted to see what you thought about who would have orchestrated this. Would this event, these executions, have been controlled, been orchestrated from Iraq and Syria, or would it have been just an independent decision within Libya, within the cell in Libya?
I think there's certainly some control or influence from ISIL in Syria, because this was done the exact same gruesome method that they've used in numerous other videos and hundreds of other executions. So
there seems to be a line of communication.
There is a line of communication. I agree with what Jason said. In Libya, you have a distinct set of issues that is causing the turmoil there. Terrorism anywhere in the world is like politics. It's all about local issues. But so ISIL is having this influence on them, and I think it's cutting both ways with the allegiance. For ISIL, it shows their potential recruiting base that they are still influential. They've had some major setbacks in the last several weeks in Iraq and Syria. It shows they're still a major force to reckon with. At the local level, in Libya in particular, in the Philippines, in Pakistan, you're seeing these existing terrorist organizations swearing allegiance because they want that ISIL brand. They see them as winning, and they want that same intimidation for their own local fights.
So it's not necessarily the case that they wholly agree with the ideology, but they want to jump on the bandwagon, if you like.
Exactly. Even in the Philippines, Abu Sayyaf has sworn allegiance, but they've made very clear they've sworn allegiance, but they've got their own agenda that they're going to fight.
All right, Martin, we'll take that on in a second. But I have to say, it's not surprising that inevitable comparisons are being drawn between ISIL and al-Qaeda, meaning the base al-Qaeda grew out of a network of volunteers who fought in Afghanistan against Soviet forces in the 1980s. By 2001, the group had evolved with a worldwide reach, gaining lasting notoriety, of course, with the 9/11 attacks on the US that year. It has since been driven out of its former safe haven in Afghanistan and weakened in Pakistan, but multiple groups across the Muslim world have taken up its cause. Even so, as we've been discussing, it's largely been overshadowed by the new group on the block, if you like, ISIL. has its roots in al-Qaeda in Iraq, but established itself under the name of the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant in 2013. And that caused a split between the group and al-Qaeda's affiliate in Syria, the al-Nusra Front. But it was in June last year that it made a global impact, taking the Iraqi military by surprise and seizing a number of cities across the north and west of the country. And soon afterwards, it established what it calls a caliphate. And ISIL territory now stretches from Diyala province in Iraq to just outside Aleppo in Syria. So, Martin, ISIS is basically spreading its franchise now. They are, and they was clear weeks ago where they were going to expand beyond Iraq and Syria. And again, it's good for them because it keeps their base going. It's good for the people that where they're expanding because it helps their cause locally. Okay, and so Jason Pack in London, how would you say it works within Libya with these groups who've sworn allegiance to ISIL? Do you think that they're playing off ISIL's notoriety, if you like?
Yeah, I just want to amplify what Martin said. These groups may not be ISIS, they're ISIS-aligned groups. Yeah. Exactly as he said, terrorism is like politics, it's all local. What they want in Sirte, Darna, and Benghazi is to have the central government out of their business. In fact, I think that the primary driver for extreme jihadi Islamism in Libya is an anti-state ideology, a view that we don't want Tobruk in our business and we don't want Tripoli in our business. And this is what makes ISIS so much more attractive than al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda, anti-Western, anti-Israeli, they love attacks, but they're not interested in governing territory. And it's that transition from a non-state to a quasi-state organization. That's what ISIS has perfected. And when first we saw in Darna, the Youth Shura Council, claiming allegiance with ISIL a while back, they're saying we want to follow that model of keeping the state out of our business and beginning to govern territory. And that's what we're seeing in Sirte. Just 2 days ago, various ISIS-aligned groups, and I don't believe they are ISIS, but they're aligned, said we're going to do that model. We're going to try to kick out the Misratan militias, even though those are Islamist-aligned militias, and we're going to govern Sirte as our own little fiefdom. So I think that without a big game-changing development, you're going to see these kind of copycat groups in Darna, in Benghazi, in Sirte, trying to govern their neighborhoods in an ISIS-like fashion.
Let's go to Tobruk again. Mohammed El-Jar.
I will clarify one point. Actually, I think it's slightly different in Libya than the two gentlemen have tried to portray. Actually, in Darna, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi has sent a specific person all the way from Syria to actually head the emirate of Darna. So how can we say that it is not actually ISIS or there is no control or it's more of a copycat? Actually, the emir of the Islamic State in Darna is a Yemeni jihadist who was sent specifically and particularly by Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi himself.
So it is actually ISIS in Libya?
It is definitely ISIS.
I'd like to push back here.
And another point is in Sirte as well, specific leaders and well-trained fighters, foreign fighters who are not local Libyans, by the way, are the ones who are taking lead and command of what is going on. And to just clarify, for example, in the city of Darna, one group has decided not, one extremist group, Libyan group, decided not to join the Islamic State, and they are still standing alone.
All right, rest, Jason Pack in London, you wanted to come
in. I'd like to, yes. First of all, Mohammed is a respected colleague and trusted friend, and all the facts that he gives us are exactly correct. I'd just like to interpret them slightly differently, which is that, yes, of course, Baghdadi sent an emir, the emir of the wilayat of Barqa, of Cyrenaica. But I don't think that means that these local Libyan actors who've joined the franchise follow directives from the home base. And that's all I'm trying to say, which is that they have local Libyan goals of establishing, de facto statelets in Darna or Benghazi or Sirte. And they're not following, oh, I got a telephone call yesterday and Baghdadi said now we need to execute the Coptic hostages. And this is relevant because they're not intruders to the Libyan political game. They're very much a part of it. And they're part of the 3- or 4-way civil war. I hope that something positive can come out of this development, which is that maybe the wide chasm between Operation Dignity, i.e. Tobruk, and Libya Dawn, i.e. Tripoli, can be transcended, and that moderate Misratans who are negotiating in Geneva and Ghadames with members of the elected House of Representatives could build their cooperation against these destabilizing ISIS actors that they both oppose. And maybe you could see a joint military operation between some Misratan Central Shield forces and some of Haftar's forces to reclaim Sirte. That would be a great way forward to pull something positive out of this negative development and connect it to the negotiated settlement track.
Okay, Martin Reardon, so what's your take on this? So here we have slightly disparate views in terms of ISIS within Libya, and if they are actually ISIS or if they're just affiliated to ISIS, but certainly ISIS wants to spread the caliphate as far as it possibly can.
Well, I agree. I think both gentlemen made correct statements. Baghdadi did send a personal envoy to Libya, but as Jason said, they're influenced by ISIS. Certainly they are influenced, but they're not taking the day-to-day directives on how they're going to operate. That's just not realistic to run a terrorist campaign in Libya from Syria. They are heavily influenced by ISIS, but their reason for fighting the government and the other groups are local. And you see this in Pakistan with TTP when those fighters split and formed their own allegiance in the Khorasan region on the Afghan-Pak border. You see it in the Philippines. You see it in Tunisia. Heavily influenced by ISIS, but the battle they're fighting is local.
Right, and now in the video, this group, the Libyan group, saying that they aim to conquer Rome, and the Libyan branch well placed to establish bases, it sounds like they have already, within the country, and from there is pretty easy access into Europe. There is.
You see it almost daily with the refugees that are going across.
That's right, and there's talk that they could infiltrate those boats and therefore be taken in as refugees.
They could easily do that. Although one thing I would like to point out, with ISIL wanting to conduct attacks in Europe, in North America, they don't have to send fighters from Libya or from Iraq and Syria there. They have supporters all over the world, in Europe, in North America, in Asia. They have supporters that will do that bidding for them. And you've seen this in attacks in Canada back in the fall, in Europe recently, in Libya. So they have supporters that will do this.
Okay. Jason Pack, let's examine how we can counter this. What's the means of taking ISIS on within Libya and indeed across the region? It's hard enough, as we've seen all too often in Syria and Iraq, but in Libya as well?
Well, thanks for such an easy question.
Yeah.
ISIS conducts these kind of attacks to goad an over-response. They love the tactic of beheading because it catches media headlines, it makes people angry, and it pushes Obama or Cameron to go beyond what they're comfortable doing. So I am not an advocate of some kind of NATO mission or intervention in Libya now. What we need to do, of course, is to consider Libya important. Libya is a top-tier Western issue at the level of Syria, Iraq, Ukraine, and it's a top-tier regional issue. And that's why the Egyptians are intervening. They have real interests there. And that's why the Qataris and Turks are intervening. They have real interests there. But they're intervening on opposite sides, those two camps, and that's destabilizing. What the West needs to do is to really soup up the Geneva/Ghadames negotiated process and give a tremendous amount of carrots and sticks to both sides to help these moderate groups coalesce. And to build on what I said earlier, this was a horrible tragedy, what's just happened, but maybe if moderate Misratan actors and forces aligned with Operation Dignity could sit down together and say, oh my, it's such a shame we've been fighting each other in this civil war. We actually should be fighting these extreme jihadists who are trying to destroy our country, blow up our oil pipelines, which they just did recently. We want to protect the future of Libya. I know that there have been difficulties in getting this kind of grand coalition before, but now the time is very ripe.
Right, okay. Well, at this point, I would like to bring in Mohammed El-Jir from Tobruk, but I can't, unfortunately, because I understand the power has gone down in the city of Tobruk, so we've lost our Skype connection. So the three of us will have to continue, and if we get Mohammed back, we'll bring him in, of course. Martin, what do you think about Jason's comments there, this concept that we'll have to soup up the effort to help moderate groups coalesce within Libya?
Well, I agree. Moderate groups and the governments. Jason was very correct in what ISIL is trying to do with all of these videos. There's a number of things, but one of them is to provoke an overreaction by whoever that video is targeting. In the terms of the Western hostages that were executed late last year, to put ground troops in Iraq and Syria and elsewhere.
Right, to sow unrest, basically, and destabilize the whole region.
That will bring fighters in, just like it did 2003 to the end of that decade. Western troops in Iraq, fighters were coming worldwide to fight them.
The tactic's working then.
It works. So they want that overreaction. It hasn't happened yet. There is a coalition with Western and Arab countries that are conducting airstrikes. That's not the overreaction that they look for. They want the ground troops on there. So it's a matter of, you know, it's going to come down. They're going to have to be fought on the ground. It's going to have to be Arab countries, Arab armies that are going to do that,
we see Italy and I think France as well calling for NATO to lead a campaign to try and hold ISIS in Libya.
A ground campaign, that's exactly what they want. They're baiting you. They're baiting the West into doing that. The solution, and I think that the coalition right now is on this, the solution has to be Arab governments are going to have to fight them on the ground.
And Jason Pack, is that something that we're likely to see, that Arab governments will step in and fight them on the ground?
I fear that they will. I disagree with Matt here in the sense that I don't think that regional military intervention is the answer. In fact, I see his point about goading an overreaction. This is about goading Egypt into overreaction, not just getting the Egyptians to bomb terrorist training camps, but getting them to invade militarily in Cyrenaica, because Egypt is already the #1 supporter of Haftar's Operation Dignity and the Tobruk government. This video is meant to get Sisi to act more. I don't think he should take the bait, but he probably will. What I want to see is a Western diplomatic coalition giving carrots and sticks. Some sticks to the Egyptians. If they intervene too much, they're going to be punished in this way. Some sticks to the Qataris and the Turks. If weapons that they give to the, Misratans or some forces in Tripoli end up with the jihadi forces, we're going to do this, that, and the other. We need to help the Libyans solve this problem and really incentivize a coalition of moderates who are willing to form a national unity government, put the Constitution to referendum, get back on the transitional track. All outside actors working militarily in Libya is to the detriment of Libyan ability to move beyond the post-Gaddafi struggles and form a real stable government.
Right, and Martin, more generally, if ISIL's aim is to spread the brand of ISIL, the franchise, if you like, across the region, and we're not specifically talking about Libya here, but across the region, and as far as it possibly can, how can you focus attention on that? Because it's almost a sporadic approach that you need, isn't it?
Well, yes, they are trying to extend the brand across the region. They do this through that violent ideology, and that appeals to certain actors. While many people will find it repulsive, there are people where that appeals to them. It's because they both believe in that cause, but also because they feel the most violent way to act is the only way they're going to win.
Yeah, but then how do you take them on? I mean, so tactically, in a more general sense, not just in Libya, how do you take them on?
The long-term solution is to go after the ideology and prove it wrong. But I think locally, and Jason was correct, in Libya, and I was not suggesting that the Egyptians should invade Libya, but yes, they have to be fought by the Libyans, by moderate Libyans. They're going to have to fight. In Iraq, you're going to have the Iraqi army that's going to fight them. In Syria, if there is such a thing as a moderate force that they can put together, they're going to have to fight them. But I think at some point, too, you're along the border regions at least, Jordan may respond across border. Turkey could respond along their border. But it's going to have to be an Arab solution. I mean, you can go back and argue that where this all started a decade or so ago, but that's then. What's the problem now? And I think it's going to require an Arab solution. with support from the West. But the actors, the main actors on the ground, whether they are the local governments that you're beefing up or moderate resistance forces, that's where the solution is going to be found. Okay. Gents, we'll have to leave it there. We appreciate your perspective on this. Martin Reardon here in Doha. Jason Pack in London, thank you very much indeed. In his absence now, Mohammed El-Jar from Tobruk. We appreciated his contribution. Thanks very much indeed. And thank you for joining us. If you've got anything you'd like to add, you can go to our programme page at aljazeera.com. You can post your comments at facebook.com/AJ Inside Story or send your tweets to @AJ Inside Story. I'm Nick Clark from the whole team. It's bye for now.